The album, The Mandrake Project, has got some links with the comic, but it's not a concept album or anything else like that.
Well, Bruce, I would like to start by asking you about how this idea of the Mandrake Project came about. Because I know it's a whole story, from the fact of the story of the protagonist himself and characters like Dr. Necropolis, to the subject itself and how this story works about human souls.
Okay, so back in 2014, I was started to write this album with Roy in the USA. The title track was going to be a song called "If Eternity Should Fail," which is actually, the title comes from a Doctor Strange comic episode. So at that time, I had the idea of doing one comic with the album, and maybe it would be like a concept album, and we'd have a narrator and all that kind of stuff. So I tried doing some narration at the end of the demo of that particular song, just to see if it would sound stupid or not. Next thing, Iron Maiden decide to record the song. I'm like, hey, cool, okay, I can always kind of redo it. And then I got sick with throat cancer. That was a year. And then I went back with Maiden, and we had lots of catch up to do playing around the world. And then everything happened with COVID. So suddenly from like, hey, yeah, I think we'll do an album called If Eternity Should Fail, and maybe there'll be a comic. And 7 years later, I'm back in the room with Roy Z going, listen, where were we, before we were so rudely interrupted? But the 3 years of lockdown, I'd had a lot of time to think and write, and the story had grown from the basic story at the beginning of the album to like a 12 episode comic book, graphic novel, whatever you want to call it, but 12 episodes, 34-page episode, and I realized that the album itself didn't need a story to the album. It could just be called The Mandrake Project, and it has an association with the comic. The comic is called The Mandrake Project as well, and you discover why it was called The Mandrake Project when you read the comic. The album, The Mandrake Project, has got some links with the comic, but it's not a concept album or anything else like that. I didn't want to limit myself as to what I could write and what I could do or not do on it. And I wanted the freedom to be able to go wherever our musical imagination wanted to take us,
So I understand that the comic and the album are completely can exist without each other, right?
Yeah, they work together. I mean, it's like a cafe con leche. You can have an espresso and you can have the milk, and they both have different characteristics, and you put them together and you understand a little bit more about what a beautiful thing it is. So I disengaged the comic from the album, because the comic really started to take on its own life. But some of the songs still have remaining pieces from the comic in the lyrics. Not all of them, but some of them. And as I went going through the episodes of writing the comic, I've actually stolen some of my own lyrics from the album. I thought, hey, I could use that in that particular episode or something else. So later on down the line, if people get the comic and get the album, they'll realize that it's like all part of one really, hopefully quite cool puzzle.
Speaking of the songs on the album, I would like to ask about this first single, Afterglow of Ragnarok.
Yeah.
Whose music video you presented at the Brazilian Comic Con this year, along with this announcement of a comic. Is there any coincidence or reason why your first single is the first song on this upcoming album?
we had a variety of choices that we could have gone with for the first track, and I liked Ragnarok because it we could have gone with a song which sounded a bit more, how can I put it, a bit more conventional, a bit more classic rock type stuff. And I didn't want to give people the impression that was the album, because first impressions are unfortunately really important. So I wanted people to be aware that this album was dark and growly and heavy, and also more than that. So as we go through towards the actual release of the album, I think people are going to figure out that, wow, there's a lot more going on in this record than just Afterglow of Ragnarok. But you're going to put something's got to be first. And that was the track that I felt that it was maybe not the catchiest song on the record, probably the second or third, maybe. But that's why we put it out first, because people are still blown away going, oh my God, this is great. I'm like, okay, well, wait until you get the second one, and wait until there's a third one, because the album, this is an album that has a lot of depth to it.
Now, Bruce, in this project, you have your bandmates like Roy and Dave Moreno, but you also work hand in hand with Tony Lee, who has written several comic stories. How did Lee come on board for this project?
When I wrote the character Dr. Necropolis in some detail and wrote about his life and his backstory and all the other characters that I started populating, and I did all this on my own, and I was working with a Hollywood I wasn't working, it's too strong a word. I was having Zoom calls over lockdown with a Hollywood writer called Kurt Sutter, who wrote The Sons of Anarchy and The Shield and Mayans MC, and so he's an amazing writer. And he was really interested in the story, and I said, so you think this story is good then? He said, yeah, definitely. I said, well, look, I'm thinking of making it into a comic. I said, but how do I do that? Who do I talk to? I don't know anything. I mean, if I turn up and walk into Marvel, they're going to throw me out, I said, so who do I talk to? So he went and did some research for me, which is very kind of him, and said, look, you should contact these guys called Z2 Comics. Well, it turned out that Z2 Comics were already talking to Iron Maiden's management about doing an Iron Maiden book. So then I met up with them and I said, look, are you interested in this project? But it's not what you normally do. This is much more of a Watchmen type project. It's not a one-off. This is going to take 3 years of commitment to do this. Anyway, they read the project and they read the script and they read all the bits and they went, look, this is great, we're in. And they hooked me up with Tony Lee, who happened to be in Los Angeles for a comic convention when they were in Los Angeles, and then I was in Los Angeles doing some work on the album. So we all went out and had a few beers and bite to eat, and we just got on great. I mean, we were just telling each other stories all night. Tony's fantastic, so Tony was the guy that brought on board Stas Johnson as the artist. He suggested him specifically. And then the last element really was Bill Sienkiewicz on the cover art, which was, I couldn't believe that Bill was on board, is on board for all 12 episodes now. It's fantastic.
Well, Mr. Bruce, thank you so much for your time, for all your answers.